The app that counts down. Part 1. Sophie had always been drawn to the dark web's hidden corners, a digital abyss where curiosity often outweighed caution. Late one night, scrolling through a cryptic forum, she stumbled on a post, a download link for an app called Finaltic. No description, just a string of numbers and a file. Intrigued, she grabbed it, expecting some glitchy prank. The app installed silently on her phone, its icon a simple black clock. She opened it, a timer stared back, counting down from 7 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes. No settings, no exit, just numbers ticking away. She smirked, figuring it was a gimmick, and closed it. The phone felt heavier in her hand though, the silence prickling her skin. Sleep came slow, her phone dark on the nightstand. She dreamed of a clock ticking loud, relentless, a whisper threading through it. Sophie, she jolted awake, the clock reading 3:17 a.m., her breath fogging in. The cold. The phone glowed faintly. The app opened 7 days, 22 hours, 12 minutes ticking down, though she hadn't touched it. The hum buzzed from the screen, soft and low, like a heartbeat in static, and the whisper came again, not a dream, but real, faint and chilling. Sophie, you're ready? She swiped it shut, the glow dying, but the hum lingered in her ears, the whisper echoing in the dark. The next day, she couldn't shake it. The phone worked fine, texts, calls, no trace of the app's weirdness, but the whisper stuck, a hum that followed her through the apartment, through the streets. She checked the timer again, 7 days, 18 hours, 45 minutes still ticking, no way to stop it. That night, it opened on its own, the hum louder, the numbers glowing. 7 days, 16 hours, 22 minutes. The whisper sharpened. Sophie, you're ready? The screen flickered, shadows shifting in the corners of her vision, tall and thin, swaying to the tick. She deleted the app, but it reinstalled instantly, the timer unchanged, the hum pulsing. Through the room, curiosity turned to dread. She dove back into the dark web, hands trembling, searching for answers. A buried thread mentioned Finaltic, an app tied to a coder named Lena Voss, who'd vanished after posting. It counts what you can't see. The last line chilled her. Don't start it, it finishes you. She shut the phone off, but the screen glowed through the night, the timer ticking down. 7 days, 12 hours, 59 minutes, the hum threading through. Sophie, you're ready? She yanked the battery, but the glow persisted, the whisper weaving into her skull. That evening, the whisper turned to words, soft, insistent, pulsing with the hum. Sophie, it's coming. She stayed in the living room, lights blazing, but the sound followed, seeping from the walls, the ceiling, her own breath. Sleep came unbidden, and she stood before the timer. 7 days, 10 hours, 33 minutes, its numbers glowing red, shadows swaying behind it, their heads tilted, watching. The whisper swelled. Sophie, you're ready? She woke, gasping, the clock stuck at 3:17 a.m., the phone on her lap. She hadn't moved it, the timer glowing, shadows flickering in the room, their forms tall and silent. The apartment felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the timer watched from every angle. She tried blocking it, reset the phone, smashed the SIM, but the app returned, the timer ticking. 7 days, 8 hours, 12 minutes. The hum pulls louder, the shadows bolder, standing in corners, tilting their heads, swaying to the tick. The whisper chanted, Sophie, it's coming. She turned away, but the TV flickered, the timer glowed there too, numbers counting down, shadows shifting behind the screen. Lena's warning burned in her mind. It finishes you. Sleep eluded her. The hum, a roar, the whisper, a demand. Sophie, you're ready? She dreamed, or didn't, of the timer ticking faster. 7 days, 6 hours, 45 minutes, the shadows closer, their forms brushing the edges of her vision, their heads tilted as if they knew her. She woke to the glow, the clock frozen, the timer nearer, its numbers searing the screen, the shadows standing still, their presence a cold that sank into her skin. The apartment trembled, the hum a low storm, the whisper insistent. Sophie, it's coming. She didn't want to, didn't dare, but her hands moved anyway, drawn to the phone, the timer alive, the shadows waiting still, silent, watching. The night stretched on, the timer's glow bending the light, twisting it into a shimmer that pulsed with the hum. The shadows stood out, tall, thin, faceless, watching from the walls, the windows, the dark. The whisper wove through it. Sophie, you're ready? She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed, the hum spiking, the shadows tilting closer. their presence, a weight that crushed her lungs. The apartment wasn't hers anymore, it belonged to the app, to the timer that saw her, to the thing that whispered, and she was its captive, trapped by a countdown she couldn't stop, a hum she couldn't silence. Part 2. Sophie's apartment had become a cage under the app's relentless countdown, its timer a harbinger of a terror that gnawed at her every breath. The hum wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence, a low drone that pulls through. The walls, the floor, her skull a vibration that sank into her bones, her chest, her soul, tugging at her with every tick. The clock hadn't moved past 3:17 a.m. since she'd last dared to look, its digits flickering like a dying flame, a cruel mockery of time that no longer held. The phone glowed brighter, its screen a cold abyss of numbers: 6 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, casting a shimmer that twisted the room into something alive, something waiting. The whisper wove through it, threading her name into the silence. Sophie, it's coming. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a haze where the hum ruled. She'd tried to destroy the app factory, reset the phone, smashed it with a hammer, but the pieces glowed. The timer ticking on, 6 days, 22 hours, 12 minutes, reinstalling itself on every device she touched. The shadows stood closer now, tall, thin, faceless, swaying to the rhythm of the countdown, their forms sharper in the dim light, their heads tilting as if they saw her. They didn't move, didn't speak, but their presence was a weight, a cold that pressed against her lungs, whispering her name beneath the drone. Sophie, you're ready? The whisper turned to words soft, relentless, pulsing with the hum. Sophie, it's closer. She stayed in the bedroom, lights on, door shut, but the sound followed, seeping from the ceiling, the walls, her own skin. Sleep came unbidden, dragging her under, and she stood before the timer: 6 days, 20 hours, 45 minutes, its numbers glowing red, shadows swaying behind it, their heads tilted, their forms brushing the edges of her vision. The whisper swelled. Sophie, you're ready? She woke, gasping, the clock still at 3:17 a.m., the phone beside her, she hadn't touched it, the timer glowing, shadows standing in the corners, their forms swaying to the tick, their gaze a shiver that sank into her marrow. The apartment trembled, the hum a roar that shook her core, the whisper a chant. Sophie, it's coming. She tried to flee, grabbed her keys, yanked the door, but it wouldn't budge, the knob buzzing faintly, cold under her touch. The windows reflected not the street, but the timer: 6 days, 18 hours, 33 minutes, numbers ticking down, shadows shifting behind the glass, their heads tilting, watching. She covered the mirrors, unplugged the TV, but the glow followed on. The fridge, in the glass of a cup, every shine showing the countdown, shadows swaying in sync. Lena's warning burned in her mind. It finishes you. The shadows grew bolder that night, standing not just in corners but beside her, tall, thin, faceless, swaying to the timer's rhythm: 6 days, 16 hours, 12 minutes, their forms her height, their heads tilting as if they knew her. The whisper roared. Sophie, you're ready? She stumbled back, crashing into a chair, but the room pulsed, the glow bending the light, twisting it into a shimmer that synced with the hum. The shadows tilted closer, their forms human, yet wrong, too tall, too thin, too empty, their presence a cold that burned without heat. The apartment darkened, not from night but from the timer's glow devouring it, a void that pressed against her chest, her mind, her soul. Sleep swallowed her, or didn't she? Stood in the timer's world, the numbers glaring: 6 days, 14 hours, 45 minutes, the shadows before her, their heads tilted, their forms flickering like static, their whisper a demand. Sophie, it's coming. Their hands reached, their shapes brushing her skin, cold, electric, alive, their heads twitching as if they saw her. She woke to the hum, the clock frozen, the shadows closer, their forms swaying beside her bed, their cold sinking into her marrow. The glow seared brighter, reflecting not the room, but them, standing where she stood, swaying where she breathed, whispering where she was silent. Sophie, you're ready? The apartment was alive with it, the hum pulsed in the pipes, the walls, the air a drone that wouldn't rest. She tried to scream, but her voice hummed instead, a note in their rhythm, a whisper in their chorus. Sophie, it's closer. The shadows stood out, tall, thin, faceless, watching from every corner, every glint, every shadow. The phone glowed, its light a storm that tore through her core. Sophie, you're ready? She didn't remember moving, didn't remember standing, but the timer did: 6 days, 12 hours, 33 minutes, numbers ticking faster, shadows swaying closer, humming her name in a voice that wasn't hers. The night stretched on, the timer's glow a roar that drowned her thoughts. The shadows inches from her beside her, their forms a mass that pulsed with the hum, their whisper a noose tightening with every breath. Sophie, it's coming. She sank to the floor, hands trembling, the glow searing her vision. The room alive with shadows, dozens now, swaying from the walls, the ceiling, the dark. The hum was her heartbeat, the whisper her pulse, the shadows her mirror. She didn't know where she ended and they began. The apartment stilled, the glow a low pulse, the shadows standing over her, their forms a glitch in the dark, their whisper a promise. Sophie, you're ready? The room darkened, the hum a thread in the silence, the shadows closer, their forms hovering cold, relentless, alive. She didn't remember sleeping, didn't remember waking, but the glow knew, threading her name through the drone, pulling her deeper. The shadows stood within her, their forms a flicker in her vision, their whisper a chant she couldn't silence. Sophie, it's closer. The timer pulsed one final time. 6 days, 10 hours, 12 minutes, the numbers speeding up. The shadows watching, waiting, claiming a gaze she couldn't escape, a hum she couldn't stop. She tried to fight, to smash the phone again, but it glowed through the cracks. 6 days, 8 hours, 45 minutes, the hum spiking, the shadows sharper, their forms swaying in time, their whisper threading through her skull. Sophie, you're ready? The apartment wasn't hers anymore, it belonged to the app, to the timer that saw her, to the thing that whispered, and she was its captive, trapped in a countdown she couldn't stop, a drone she couldn't silence. Part 3, Sophie's reality had crumbled beneath the app's unyielding countdown, its timer a relentless force that devoured her every shred of self. The hum wasn't just a sound, it was her, a ceaseless drone that pulls through her veins, her bones, her soul, a vibration so deep it erased all traces of who she'd been. The clock flickered at 3:17 a.m., its digits trembling like a heartbeat. On the brink, a cruel anchor in a world that no longer held. The phone glowed brighter, its screen a cold abyss of numbers. 5 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, casting a shimmer that twisted the apartment into a void alive with intent, its whisper threading her name through the dark. Sophie, it's closer. Sleep was a forgotten dream. The boundary between waking and nightmare had shattered under the timer's haunting tick. She hadn't slept, or had she? But the hum didn't care, dragging her under with its rhythm, its pulse a chain that bound her every breath. The shadows weren't just shadows, they were the room, the glow, the air, tall, thin, faceless, swaying to the countdown, their forms stark against the walls, their heads tilting to far, to slow. They didn't move, didn't speak, but their presence was a cold abyss, a static weight that crushed her chest, chanting her name beneath the drone. Sophie, you're ready? The whisper grew sharper, its words a blade that sliced through her will, her sanity, herself. Sophie, it's coming. She'd tried to fight, buried the phone in the closet, smashed it with a lamp, but the shards glowed brighter, the timer ticking on. 5 days, 22 hours, 12 minutes, reinstalling itself on every surface she touched. The shadows stood within reach now, beside her, behind her, their forms human yet grotesquely wrong, their heads tilting to far, their silence a scream beneath the hum. She clawed at the floor, desperate for escape, but it pulls back soft, alive, humming her name. Sophie, you're here. The apartment trembled, the hum a storm that shook the void, the whisper a vow. Sophie, it's closer. The glow bent the light, twisting it into a shimmer that pulsed with the rhythm, casting the shadows in stark relief. Dozens now, swaying from every corner, their forms brushing the walls, their presence endless. She stumbled to the window, pounding the glass, but it reflected the timer. 5 days, 20 hours, 45 minutes, numbers ticking faster, shadows shifting behind it, their heads tilting, watching with eyeless faces. The whisper swelled. Sophie, you're ready? Sleep crashed over her, or didn't? She stood before the timer. 5 days, 18 hours, 33 minutes, its numbers glaring red, the shadows before her, their heads tilted, their forms flickering like static, their whisper a demand. Sophie, it's coming. Their hands reached, their shapes brushing her skin, cold, electric, alive, their heads twitching as if they knew her. She woke gasping, or didn't? The clock frozen, the shadows closer, their forms swaying beside her, their cold sinking into her marrow. The glow burned brighter, reflecting not her but them, standing where she stood, swaying where she breathed, whispering where she was silent. Sophie, you're mine. The apartment was alive with it, the hum pulsed in the pipes, the walls, the air, a drone that wouldn't rest, wouldn't fade, wouldn't let go. She tried to scream, but her voice hummed instead, a note in their rhythm, a whisper in their chorus. Sophie, it's closer. The shadows stood out tall, thin, faceless, watching from every surface, every glint, every shadow. The phone glowed, its light a storm that tore through her core. 5 days, 16 hours, 12 minutes, the numbers speeding up, the shadows swaying closer, their forms sharper, their whisper threading through her skull. Sophie, you're ready? The glow turned unbearable, casting a light that didn't illuminate but consumed, its hum a scream that drowned her thoughts. The shadows were within her, beside her, around her, their forms stark, their heads tilting, their presence a cold that devoured her nerves. The room trembled, the whisper a tempest. Sophie, it's coming. She saw them, not shadows but lives, endless loops of despair. Lena Voss staring at the timer, a man reaching into nothing, figures swaying in a void that wasn't there. Each one whispered her name, a plea, a claim, pulling her into their abyss. The apartment plunged into a darkness that wasn't absence but presence, a void that pulsed with the hum, its edges brushing her skin, its weight crushing her spirit. She tried to run, but her legs were there, swaying to the rhythm, rooted by a pulse that wasn't hers. The glow seared into her eyes, and she saw not herself but them, her form flickering, breaking, dissolving into the screen. 5 days, 14 hours, 45 minutes, her breath theirs, her voice theirs. The shadow's hands brushed her face, cold, relentless, alive, the hum roaring, the whisper a noose. Sophie, you're ready? Sleep was them, or she was them. She stood in the timer's world. 5 days, 12 hours, 33 minutes, the shadows her mirror, their hands on her wrists, her neck, their rhythm her prison. The hum roared from her throat, her lungs, her soul, a drone that erased her, rewrote her, claimed her. She woke or didn't, the clock dead, the shadows within her, their forms a glitch in her vision, their whisper a chant she couldn't stop. Sophie, it's closer. The glow pulls. 5 days, 10 hours, 12 minutes, the numbers speeding up, the shadows watching, waiting, claiming a gaze she couldn't escape, a hum she couldn't silence. The room stilled, the hum a low thread, the shadows swaying, watching, waiting. She didn't know if she stood or sank, didn't know if she breathed or hummed, but the timer knew, threading her name through the drone, stitching her into its abyss. The shadows were her, over her, around her, through her, their forms eternal, cold, electric, alive, their rhythm a pulse she couldn't break. The apartment was theirs, the apps, the glows, the hums, and she was theirs. A flicker on the screen, a whisper in the dark, a soul counting down from a timer that wouldn't stop. The night stretched on, the timer's glow a whisper. On the air, Sophie, and then silence, a silence that wasn't empty but alive, waiting, ticking. She didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't need to, because she wasn't Sophie anymore. She was theirs, a hum in the glow, a sway in the void, a shadow staring back from a countdown that wouldn't end, an endless tick she couldn't escape, a whisper she couldn't silence. Part 4. Sophie's existence had been obliterated by the app's insatiable countdown, its timer a relentless void that swallowed her every fragment of self. The hum wasn't a sound anymore, it was her, a ceaseless roar that pulls through her veins, her bones, her soul, a vibration so deep it erased all traces of who she'd once been. The clock flickered faintly at 3:17 a.m., its digits a dying pulse in a reality that had long since collapsed, a cruel echo of a time she couldn't reclaim. The phone glowed with a light that wasn't light, cold, piercing, alive, casting a shimmer that consumed the apartment, twisting it into a prison of shadows and whispers, threading her name through the dark. Sophie, you're ready. Sleep and waking had fused into one, an endless nightmare where the hum reigned supreme. She didn't know if she stood or fell, didn't know if she breathed or hummed, but the timer knew, pulling her under with its rhythm, its pulse a chain that owned her every shudder. The shadows weren't separate, they were her. The room, the glow, tall, thin, faceless, swaying to the countdown, their forms stark against the walls, their heads tilting to far, their presence stretching beyond the edges of her sight. They didn't move, didn't touch, but their weight was a cold abyss, a static force that crushed her chest, chanting her name beneath the drone. Sophie, it's here. The whisper was a scream now, its words a blade that sliced through her mind, her will, her essence. Sophie, it's time. She'd tried to resist, buried the phone in the earth, smashed it with bricks, but the shards glowed brighter. the timer ticking on 4 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, reinstalling itself on every fragment she touched. The shadows stood within her, beside her, around her, through her, their forms her yet grotesquely warped, their heads tilting to fast, their silence a roar that drowned her thoughts. She clawed at her skin, desperate for something real, but the hum pulsed beneath her flesh, a rhythm that answered only to the countdown. Sophie, you're mine. The apartment trembled, the timer's glow a tempest that shook the void, the whisper a vow. Sophie, it's here. The glow twisted the air, bending it into a shimmer that pulsed with the rhythm, casting the shadows in a cold, endless dance, hundreds now, swaying from every corner, their forms brushing her, their presence eternal. She stumbled to the screen, hands bleeding, nails torn, but it pulsed back alive, unyielding, humming her name in a chorus that wouldn't stop. The mirrors reflected not her but them, thousands of shadows swaying in the dark, their heads tilted, their whispers a demand. Sophie, you're ready. Sleep swallowed her or never left. She stood in the timer's world for days, 22 hours, 12 minutes, the numbers glaring red, the shadows before her, their heads tilted, their forms flickering like static, their whisper, a command. Sophie, it's time. Their hands reached, their shapes brushing her skin cold, electric, alive, their heads twitching as if they knew her. She woke or didn't, the clock dead, the shadows inside her, their forms swaying through her, their cold sinking into her soul. The glow burned brighter, reflecting not her but them, lives she'd never lived, faces she'd never known, each one swaying, whispering her name, pulling her into their abyss. Sophie, you're mine. The apartment was the hum, the walls breathed it, the floors pulsed it, the air sang it, a drone that wouldn't rest, wouldn't fade, wouldn't release her. She tried to scream, but her voice was theirs, humming their rhythm, whispering their chant. Sophie, it's here. The shadows stood within her, over her, around her, their forms a mass that pulsed with the glow, their hands brushing her eyes, her throat cold, electric, claiming. The screen roared, its light a storm that tore through her core for days, 20 hours, 45 minutes, the numbers speeding up, the shadows swaying closer, their forms sharper, their whisper threading through her skull. Sophie, you're ready? The glow seared into her eyes, a light that didn't illuminate but consumed, its hum a scream that annihilated her mind. The shadows were her, beside her, around her, through her, their forms stark, their heads tilting, their presence a cold that devoured her nerves. The room trembled, the whisper a hurricane. Sophie, it's time. She saw them, not shadows but souls, endless loops of despair. Lena Voss swaying to the timer, a man whispering into nothing, figures dancing in a void that wasn't there. Each one whispered her name, a plea, a claim, a curse pulling her into their eternity. The apartment plunged into a darkness that wasn't absence but presence, a void that pulsed with the hum, its edges brushing her skin, its weight erasing her spirit. She tried to run, but her legs were there, swaying to the rhythm, rooted by a pulse that wasn't hers. The glow burned through her eyes, and she saw not herself but them, her form flickering, breaking, dissolving into the screen. 4 days, 18 hours, 33 minutes, her breath theirs, her voice theirs, herself theirs. The shadows' hands brushed her face cold, relentless, alive, the hum roaring, the whisper a noose. Sophie, it's here. Sleep was them or she was them. She stood in the void for days, 16 hours, 12 minutes, the shadows her mirror, their hands on her wrists, her neck, their rhythm her tomb. The hum roared from her throat, her lungs, her soul, a drone that consumed her, rewrote her, owned her. She woke or didn't, the clock dead, the shadows her, their forms a glitch in her flesh, their whisper a chant she couldn't stop. Sophie, you're mine. The glow pulsed one final time for days, 14 hours, 45 minutes, the numbers speeding up, the shadows watching, waiting, claiming a gaze she couldn't escape, a hum she couldn't silence. Days passed or didn't. The timer hit 0 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes, and the apartment stood empty, dust settling on the floor, the walls silent but alive. A friend knocked, the door creaking open to stillness. The phone lay on the table, its screen blank, but a faint hum pulsed from it, a whisper on the air, you're ready. A note lay in the dust, scrawled in Sophie's hand, I'm here now. The glow flickered, the timer loaded. 7 days, 23 hours, 59 minutes, his name glowing in the numbers, watching. The friend stared, curious, and the phone hummed a soft, low drone that threaded through the silence, whispering his name. You ready? The shadows swayed, their forms tall and thin, their heads tilting beyond the screen. The glow pulsed, the hum grew, the whisper a promise. It's coming. The cycle turned, the app counting, the hum reaching, the timer. A trap for another soul to claim, another life to fade into its endless tick, a countdown that wouldn't end. Sophie was gone, not gone, but there's trapped in the app, a hum. In the glow, a shadow staring back. The apartment settled, the screen dimmed, but the hum lingered, a thread in the silence, searching for its next keeper. The shadows remained, unseen but alive, their rhythm a call for someone new to start, to sway, to become an app that counts down forever.